All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's training, Onboarding Essentials. I'm Jasmine with the Raleigh-Wake Partnership to End and Prevent Homelessness, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Cindy from OrgCode to complete the training.
Thank you very much, Jasmine, and welcome. Welcome everyone, and also I want to congratulate you for entering the space of the helping community that works with people who are experiencing homelessness. And as you begin your career with a new agency, or maybe this is your first time working in the space of the homeless response system, congratulate you. It's very rewarding work, has been a part of my professional career for over 20 years. The purpose of today's training is to give you some basic 101 on homelessness, some understanding of the language and the vernacular that we use within the system of care, provide you some best practices and show you how Raleigh-Wake has applied some of these best practices, some basic tools to understand how the system of care works as you begin your career in homelessness. So let's get started. First, let's talk about the people we are serving. I'm very specific about the language that we're using here. We used to say the homeless. People are homeless. And what we know and what we should have known long ago is that homelessness is not a demographic. It is not a characteristic. It's not something that identifies someone. What we know and what we understand in our profession is that homelessness is an experience. That's why when you read about homelessness, when you listen and when you are trained, when you're working with people, you now see the word homelessness because it's a different word. It's not a noun. It is about an experience. And knowing that this is experience that has happened to someone or to a household, it really sets the context of how we approach our work in this space. We think about the words that we use to describe individuals, and there's a lot of, we started with the homeless, or people would call people living on the street, or campers. Then we started using the language about consumers, meaning that people that use the services that are provided within a crisis response system. Sometimes we refer to people as clients. If we have a caseload, if we are a case manager, sometimes we use the word clients. Other times, because we often in our workspace are representing a program where we literally enroll people into our programs, we may say that we have participants in our program. For shelters or transitional housing, oftentimes we refer to the people that present or that are seeking and receiving services. We may refer to them as guests of our shelter. And for programs that are permanent supportive housing, very site-based, or sometimes transitional housing, we may say they are residents of our program. And commonly now you will hear the phrase persons with lived experience, or persons with living experience. These are people that have or are experiencing homelessness. Sometimes you may see this is an acronym PLE. People experience or at risk of homelessness. So you can see over time in this profession how we gradually have improved looking at people who are experiencing homelessness as just that. They're our peers, they're our neighbors, they are people, they are persons experiencing something. And so we want, to the best of our ability, to adopt that language because it can very much influence and set a tone when we begin to serve people who are experiencing a housing crisis, who are experiencing homelessness, who are experiencing the traumatic loss of a permanent place to stay. So kind of look back and about homelessness, and this is the American experience. You know, in the 1970s through the 1990s, there was a lot of significant policy changing going on. There used to be extraordinary investments in HUD, in public housing and property, and we started to see a reduction as properties went into disarray. They were closed and torn down and not rebuilt. There were experience of a significant disinvestments in public housing. So what you saw going on throughout the United States, especially in urban centers, that there were fewer and fewer affordable housing units available. And then think of gentrification. When the land got cheap, the affordable housing was removed and replaced with higher rent spaces. Increasingly, urban planners from different cities began to become more strict about zoning and Board of Adjustment rules of what could come in, and increase rules about building codes, which would increase the cost of housing. Again, actions that made housing unaffordable. There used to be a lot of group homes, and think of people living at the Y. Those types of group homes, increasingly, those were zoned out of existence, and people didn't want those group homes in their neighborhoods anymore, or where there were sites where there were multiple locations where people could have really short-term leases. Again, those disinvestments, those changes began to erode the supply of very affordable housing. There were a lot of different perceptions about people on welfare. You may remember the term the welfare queen, and they would isolate one instance where someone may have abused or double dipped in different public benefits, and those became the poster child of why we should not invest in families experiencing extreme poverty. And then at the same time, you had increased deinstitutionalization of people who were experiencing mental health issues, chronic, severe mental illness. And though some of that was justified because of the lack of oversight of those facilities, all those investments in that type of permanent care, though they closed down and deinstitutionalized and encouraged those people to be mainstreamed back into community, unfortunately, the funding for those institutions did not flow into the communities that were supposed to absorb people with profound and persistent mental illness. So that's coming along, and then you get into the early 80s and into 90s, and you had what became a very unique and prevalent street homelessness problem. So now we shift to our kind of current day, and when I began my career in homelessness. Suddenly we thought that we should be ending homelessness, not just managing it, not just soup kitchens and a place to stay, right? A breakfast, a lunch, a dinner, and an overnight, and you could come in at 6 at night, but you had to be out at 6 in the morning. We start, wait a minute, we have to address the issue of homelessness. We had significant increased federal investment in housing and urban development, HUD, the VA, HHS, Health and Human Services, PATH grants, understanding that we had to put some of those money back into the system of care to address the different issues that were creating homelessness. Then the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, what we call USIC, began the process of developing a 10-year plan to end homelessness. And they went around the United States and did a World Cafe style in different communities all over, gathering the ideas of professionals that were in the space of human services and working in homelessness and working in emergency shelters to develop the nation's first 10-year plan to end homelessness, and then encourage local communities to develop these 10-year plans to end homelessness. In 2009, the HEARTH Act significantly changed the McKinney-Vento Act, and we developed the Continuum of Care Interim Rule that was in place and is in place today in 2012. This interim rule codified the establishment and the responsibilities of what we know today as the Continuum of Care bodies. So when we think about homelessness, well, who are we going to count? For most of our work in the space of emergency shelters, the partnership, and those agencies within the Raleigh-Wake homeless system, we're going to follow the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's definition. And it's specifically for people who are literally homeless. They are spending a night in a place not meant for human habitation. This could be abandoned buildings, vehicles that are not meant for overnight stay. This is where you think of people in encampments, under the bridges, the unsheltered homeless. And oftentimes when you see statistics and data or references, you may see a capital UN. That's the acronym often used to define unsheltered homelessness. It also refers to people who are staying in emergency shelter, shelter that is designated for people who have no other safe alternative place to stay. Or it can be hotel, motel lodging when that lodging is paid for by a nonprofit. So people who are in emergency shelter are also considered literally homeless. And oftentimes you will see reference about people living in emergency shelter with a ES, capital ES. That's like the acronym standing for people staying in emergency shelter. Also, people who are staying in transitional housing program. These are short stay facilities. Oftentimes we think of transitional housing, youth programs, domestic violence programs, or are some of the most prevalent transitional housing programs. There is no particular lease to stay there. They're just more longer term than just an overnight emergency shelter stay. It is intended to be temporary accommodation. Those individuals are also considered homeless. And that acronym, to understand that population, is often referred to with the capital TH. So these are the individuals we know as literal homelessness. So what about others that we do not count as homeless? People who are doubled up with family or friends, or maybe living in overcrowded housing. And though we know that these populations may be at imminent risk or very precariously housed, they are not yet living on the street. They are not yet in an emergency shelter. They are not yet in transitional housing. Hopefully will not ever fall into those categories, but that you will hear people talk about being doubled up or overcrowded. When people are living in RVs or other vehicles that accommodate overnight stay, now, I'm not talking about an abandoned RV that has no access to water and electricity, is not an RV park. We're talking about living in an RV, and even though that may be all someone can afford, they're not considered homeless. We think that people who are incarcerated, maybe in hospital or other institutional settings, if they were homeless, technically, when they're in those facilities or institutionalized, they're not considered literally homeless, but based on maybe where they were prior to institutionalization, this would just represent a break in their homeless. But technically, on the days that they're in those facilities, they're generally not considered homeless or part of their homeless stay. It's also important to note that other federal agencies have different definitions, or the definitions are slightly different than HUD. Again, we primarily use the HUD definition for the purposes of how we collect data, how we determine eligibility for the majority of our programs. But the Department of Education begins to recognize doubled up families in a different way. Couch surfing, when we think of people who move from house to house, very episodic and transitory nature, those can be included for eligibility. So just know that there are differences, but we primarily use the HUD definition. And I have a link here to the HUD definition criteria and record keeping. This can be important, especially as some of you, depending on what your work is, that may be involved in either documenting a person's homelessness or required to verify homelessness for eligibility. And there are 4 basic categories. Category 1 that we've been talking about, literally homeless. Category 2, very specific, imminent risk of homelessness. This could be someone who has gotten a notice to vacate. The notice to vacate is within 10 days. We have an absolute date and time that we know that they are going to lose their housing. The place that they had to stay is about to be gone, or it's imminent. Category 3 is this homelessness under other federal definitions. It is one of those that most don't apply, most services don't apply, but know that is there, and that is a programmatic eligibility requirement related to other federal agencies. And then category 4, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. So these are very specific categories. Category 1 and category 4 are often critical eligibility criteria when we are counting the people who are experiencing homelessness or for eligibility for some of our programs, specifically transitional housing, rapid rehousing, potentially permanent supported housing. Category 2, imminent risk of homelessness, is often the criteria or the threshold when we're thinking about our homeless prevention resources that come from Emergency Solutions Grant or other prevention and diversion efforts. Again, there's much more detail and the actual requirements. Just because someone says they're homeless and experienced it, when it comes to program eligibility, there literally are specific rules about record keeping. So I encourage you to make yourself familiar with that record keeping and grabbing that document to understand the rules surrounding that for eligibility. Now let's talk about some of the categories, typologies of homelessness that are tracked by HUD, specifically when they're gathering information and try to understand the impact of homelessness in the United States. We know from the work that was done and when the McKinney-Vento Act was changed and the Hearth Act in 2009, increasingly understanding that chronic homelessness needed a definition, and really are talking about that somewhere between 18 to 24% in most communities of those individuals that are experiencing homelessness, and it's persistent. It's of a long duration, and it's also accompanied by other contributing factors that are creating the housing barriers, the barriers to getting the supportive services that the individuals may need. And so there's this literal definition, and it comes in 3 parts. One is that you are currently homeless, literally homeless. You're unsheltered, or you're in an emergency shelter, or for some communities actually have a safe haven program, which is a grandfathered program, but is a specific permanent stay oftentimes in an emergency shelter setting for people with severe persistent mental illness. And then you'll see so one must meet all of these 3 criteria. In addition to being currently literally homeless, that the experience that they're having is of a very long duration, either 1 year continuous, that's 365 days or more, or that their experience of homelessness is documented to have 4 episodes of homelessness over a period of the last 3 years, not any 3 years, the last 3 years, where when you add up all those days of homelessness over those 4 periods in 3 years, it equals 12 months or more. And the experience, there must be the documentation of a disabling condition. And the disabling condition, when you look at that record keeping document I mentioned in the prior screen, there are actual record keeping requirements of what it means to document a disability. The disability must long, continuing, or indefinite, and that it is significant in impeding their ability to live independently or to access housing. So chronically homeless is something that has been tracked. The initiative to end chronic homelessness has been significant. There's a lot of work that has been going on in Raleigh-Wake. It is a number that is followed. And again, like UN, ES, and TH, when referred to chronic homelessness, oftentimes you may see that acronym, CH, that references chronic homelessness. Other categories of homelessness that are tracked by HUD, when in January of each year, the conducting of the point in time count to end homelessness, all that data that is gathered and collected, they dive into that data to understand different components of homelessness. How many individual adults are experiencing homelessness? How many veterans are experiencing homelessness? Households with children, youth, what we call transitional aged youth, aged 18 to 24. What about unaccompanied youth, used to be known as homeless and runaway youth, that are 17 and under, and also parenting youth. These are subcategories within the population of people who are experiencing homelessness where the data is specifically tracked. And this also can provide information when you think about the planning that goes on in your community. How are we doing in ending veteran homelessness? When we look at the number of individual adults experiencing homelessness, do we have the appropriate shelter and programs to accommodate those? households with children? Is it increasing, decreasing? What are the barriers to families with children? Do we have the adequate shelter for them? Do we have the adequate permanent supportive housing or the adequate rental assistance? Do we have enough affordable housing units in our community with enough bedrooms for large families with children? What about youth, and what is the background of the youth? Are there problems with our juvenile justice system where they're discharged, exiting foster care? Are the youth getting access to education? So you can see there are very specific reasons that we examine these subpopulations to understand our system of care and the provisions of services that they may need. We step back and look at homelessness in the United States. And this chart begins in 2007. In 2006, HUD let everyone know, all the continuum of care know, that beginning in 2007, they would be required to conduct at least every 2 years, the odd number year, a point in time count sometime in the last 10 days of January. And so this is where the data begins to be collected. And in 2006, many communities, and the community that I was a part of, conducted our first trial, major comprehensive point in time count, where we were trying to figure out how to do 100% geographic coverage of the area, getting our methodology down, figuring out what kind of questionnaire and tool we were going to use. And it was before 2007, there were people would do sampling. Some communities did. I think Boston, Massachusetts is one of the oldest communities that had been conducting census of the homeless for many, many years, and actually provided some models on how to do it. And HUD puts out very specific guidance to communities each year on how to conduct them. And so you can see from these the subgroups, the green line is people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. That means outdoors. The gray line, shelter people, persons in emergency shelter, in safe haven, in transitional housing. And then the blue line is all homeless individuals. And you can see how it's tracked and was going down. And you can see now in recent times how it's starting to creep back up. One thing that was significant in this report that just came out, that in 2020, that was the first year since we've been conducting these counts in 2007, that the number of unsheltered individual adults was greater than sheltered in the United States. And so, this is for individual adults. And that was that new phenomenon that we're seeing. And when you look at a picture of the United States and you see how that's impacting the West Coast, Florida, New York, that these are the primary areas on each of the eastern and the western coasts of where you're seeing this extraordinary experience and increase of homelessness. And you will also understand this correlation between that and the continued loss and unaffordability of places to stay. So let's look at your numbers, experience of homelessness in Raleigh-Wake, and the point in time count, January 2020. Now, though many communities were conducting homeless counts in 2021, COVID was very significant and making it very difficult. We had to social distance. We used our HMIS system. We used our computer data systems and some of them were delayed into February and later. So we're going to look at our best count to represent Raleigh-Wake. And there were 769 total households. That would 974 persons, and 7% of persons experiencing homelessness were between the ages of 18 to 24, that transitional aged youth. So this gives you an idea. And what's important about a point in time count, it's a point in time, it's a snapshot. This was just on that night, how many people experiencing homelessness. When you step back and say, well, how many people will experiencing homeless over the course of an entire year, that annualized count, that information can be gathered and measured from the data system. It would be more than that, but this, and understanding what that snapshot is, and this data feeds up to the state, feeds up to HUD, This is where we get an idea of what's going on state by state, community by community, and across the United States when we look at this point in time count. It doesn't tell the entire story, but when it is continually measured at the same point in time on the same period, this in January, we get good numbers that give us a relatively consistent methodology of counting our progress, measuring our progress, and ending homelessness locally and nationally. So the continuum of care, and note that you're going to know what this is and you're going to be able to understand the difference, but sometimes it can confuse individuals in the general public because it's really relatively new from that Hearth Act, that the interim rule in 2012. So it can mean a lot of things, and I use it, I'll say, oh, well, what's the continuum of care doing about that? So what am I referring to? Am I referring to the system? Am I referring to a board of directors? Am I referring to a lead agency? So let's kind of walk through those things. So some people say, well, it's funded by the COC. Well, what they're talking about is the Continuum of Care Program Grant. Some people call that the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability, that currently, right now, we're waiting for it to be announced by HUD any day now. This is a significant source of funding that primarily funds the permanent supportive housing, coordinated entry, homeless management information systems, and for some communities, transitional housing. So it's also maybe known as the COC grant or COC funds. This is specifically a specific HUD federal grant source. There's also the COC. Some people consider it or call it the COC board. Now, this is the coordinating governing body, and it is expected to address homelessness through coordinated, community-based approach, identifying needs, building a system of care, monitoring and examining and looking where things need to be changed. The COC board is a requirement for Raleigh-Wake in order to apply for the COC grant. And then there's the COC lead agency. So that would be for y'all, Raleigh-Wake Partnership. This is the agency, the backbone agency that leads and identifies, takes action as guided by the COC board to carry out the operational needs of the continuum of care. They also served as the collaborative applicant, keyword applicant, in applying for the COC program grant. Are you confused yet? Well, it's not meaning to be confused, but just so you can understand that the COC in conversations or when you're reading or when you're in meetings, to make sure you understand, are we talking about the lead agency? Are we talking about the board? Are we talking about the grant? And then there's in general the COC membership, which is really, sometimes it's literal, a roster of people who are members of the continuum of care. Another time it just refers to this system, these people that come together in a coordinated way in our community, all elements, using these funds, guided by a board, led by the lead agency in their work to manage and operate the system of care for homelessness. So there's over 400 continuum of care in the United States, and it literally is a continuum of care geographic area. You actually have a code. So yours is NC 507. NC stands for North Carolina. And you can see the different COCs within your state. And there is, for me, I'm TX 601, where I am in the state of Texas. And these are these communities, they each are assigned a budget for the COC grant, of which the COC board that guides each of these different COCs works with their COC lead agency and collaborative applicant to apply for. And each of these sub-regions, these COC areas, they collect data, they do point in time counts, they do all the same things that you do in Raleigh-Wake that feed upstream to provide information and data and a response to homelessness. As you can see, the biggest area, that light green that seems to include, go from end to end, from Cherokee to Dare, that is called the balance of state, meaning that most continuum of care represent a hub of a major or middle urban area and surrounding areas. Some COCs are multiple counties. And then within a state, when you get into the rural areas or areas that are lower populations, they throw all those counties into one continuum of care, and they call it the balance of state. There's a Texas balance of state that has 210 counties. So balance of states can represent a broad area, often rural areas with very limited support, and they're very challenged and to be able to provide a community response because they deal with many different communities, and geographically they could be spread hundreds and hundreds of miles apart. So this is how these jurisdictions are named, labeled, and their data is tracked by HUD. So your Wake County Continuum of Care, NC 507, also with a board, has its board of directors and their mission and vision for this continuum of care. The Raleigh-Wake Continuum of Care plans, develops, and implements comprehensive and coordinated strategies across funding sources and systems to address homelessness in Raleigh-Wake County. You can hear the words, they're very representative of the obligations and the tasks that HUD intended for a continuum of care to perform. The vision of the Raleigh-Wake Continuum of Care is to ensure that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. We will achieve this vision through our shared values and actions. And in the space of homelessness across the United States, many communities have a very similar vision, including the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness and their homelessness plan. They have recently modified it to make homelessness rare, brief, and one time. And those three words are very representative of a lot of our work and how we measure. If homelessness is rare, the number of people experiencing homelessness should go down. If it's brief, that means that how long people remain in homelessness is short. And non-recurring or one time refers to that once they have exited homelessness, they don't return. It's reducing recidivism in homelessness. And so that vision is found in many communities by many named in many continuum of care across the United States. So your COC has established its values, and we're going to dive into some of these a little deeper in the training today. Housing first. We recognize that housing is a human right and will not require preconditions for access to housing. Preconditions? Well, in some communities years ago and in some agencies today, the thought was that the person was the problem, not the lack of housing, and that the presence of substance use, addictions, mental health, that they needed to achieve a level of stabilization before we would consider them to be housed. So that's what is meant by preconditions. And now we operate where we don't apply those preconditions. Trauma-informed. We will use trauma-informed practices in how we work together and serve people experiencing homelessness. This referenced the fact that we know that a majority, maybe close to all persons who are experiencing homelessness may have experienced a brief traumatic episode that led or was a cause of homelessness, maybe have experienced extreme trauma in youth, as a child, as a family, victimization. We understand that when people present for services, we are informed that people are either experiencing an immediate crisis. We understand the impact of trauma on behavior, on emotions, and that we take that into consideration as we present our services and help. Equity and justice. We work to eliminate discrimination so that race, ethnicity, gender identity, or sexual orientation are not predictors of who becomes homeless or predictors of outcomes within the homeless system. We are committed to re-envisioning just systems to prevent and end homelessness. We've talked a lot about equity and justice in the United States over the last couple of years, but know that racial equity and examining our systems of care with a racial equity lens have been at the forefront of the homeless system for several years now, and only recently we're really starting to see communities not just put it in their values, but act on those values, including Raleigh Wake. Leadership by people with lived experience. There's that phrase. Rather than saying leadership by homeless people, we say leadership by people with lived experience. We will be accountable to people experiencing homelessness, and we will ensure there are meaningful and accessible ways to participate in changing decisions. We make sure that they are not just clients and participants and residents, but they have voice, they have agency, they have choice. Continuing with the values of your continuum of care. Transparency. We believe in being transparent with people experiencing homelessness in our community. No secrets, our rules, our standards, the resources we have, the system we use, the processes, the eligibility criteria. It's all transparent. It's all on the website. It's presented, and we make sure that people understand how decisions are made. Efficiency. We implement efficient systems that help people experiencing homelessness get housing as quickly as possible, because every day a person spends unhoused is a day too many. So we want to make sure that we do it right, and we continue to monitor how our system is working, always in a continuous improvement mode. Collaboration. Working together is better than working alone. Client-driven. We believe that people experiencing homelessness are expert in their own lives, and that service providers' role is to support strengths and overcome barriers. Client-driven, client-centered. So let's look about, we have values, but how would we put that in action in this career in homeless services? Well, thinking about housing first, we understand that housing is what ends homelessness. We understand that healing, recovery, stability, and the road to wellness begins with housing. We make sure that we focus on assisting people to access and maintain their housing without demonstration of preferred behaviors or meeting set requirements or mandates. We understand, we accept people where they are, how they are, and we, as professionals, work within the strengths and the abilities and the capacities of people, and we accept them without judgment, that they have equal access to our services. We know that people experiencing homelessness, especially episodic and chronic homeless, have experienced or continue experiencing traumatizing events. Oftentimes, some traumatizing events can happen after one becomes homeless. We know it's not their fault. We understand that they could suffer acute stress or post-traumatic stress, and the knowledge allows us to better serve and understand with compassion and deliver our services in a trauma-informed way. We engage the people we serve with the lens of equity, recognizing their humanity, their value, and we give them our respect, our attention, and our professional service without bias or judgment. And for many of us, that is a continued journey of understanding when our own biases can creep up, even when we don't acknowledge it. So that is not just a value, but to act on it and recognize it when presented with situations, and we recognize that maybe we are not distributing our compassion equitably. That's a way to put those values in action. Leadership by people with lived experience. We listen to individuals. We regularly get feedback. We ask people during exit interviews about their experience, so that helps us, even as a case manager. And you have, wherever you're working within the system of care, they're transitioning to a new program, or they're exiting the shelter through private housing, asking them during that exit interview, when you're doing your exit assessment, asking them how they did. What was the best thing about your experience? What was the most frustrating? Continuing to listen to people with lived experience. Make sure the people we serve understand our role, their role, and make sure that we continually are clear about our expectations. And because we're trauma informed, we make sure that we're careful of our language, not use too many acronyms, and we very carefully say, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that, I'm going to meet you on Thursday, and then we'll compare notes, making sure that they understand, using mirroring language. We understand that the rules are not 40 pages and 6-point type, that they're clearly understood and they're conveyed in a way that everyone understands. We offer the people choices. Now, oftentimes in our era of very few housing choices, we do what we can to provide levels of agency for the individual and choice, because once they leave us, they're going to be back in on their own without our assistance and help. So letting them make decisions at every point possible helps to support and guide them. We don't lead, we guide, we coach, we mentor, but we want to make sure that they are the expert of their lives and they have control of their lives, and they can see that in the way that we deliver services. Now let's talk about the lead agency. The Raleigh-Wake Partnership to End and Prevent Homelessness leads a coalition of institutions, organizations, business, and individuals committed to developing a coordinated system that helps individuals and families who are experiencing homelessness to self-sufficiency. In addition to acting as a COC lead, the partnership oversees the HMIS system at the local level, Homeless Management Information System, and manages the Coordinated Access System. And some people will use the word Coordinated Entry System. They are the same thing. So this is like the primary function and the role of the partnership in your community. Some of the key responsibilities that they perform. As the lead, they plan, develop, implement, and support the strategic plan for the homeless response system. The community, the board, develops a plan. This is our strategic actions we're going to take this year, next year, and they make sure that the tools, the coordination, the planning, the meetings, the work, the monitoring, the reporting is done to support a strategic plan. They administer the Homeless Management Information System, and heretofore I will probably just refer to this as the HMIS. And they prepare the reports. All that data, all that information, those point-in-time counts, those COC program grants, the collaborative applicant, all the reports and things that the federal government expects to demonstrate use of the array of federal funds, it is their responsibility to prepare those reports and to administer the HMIS. They administer the Coordinated Access System, and they are the collaborative applicant to apply for HUD funding through the COC program grant. So that there will be a local competition of the COC program grant annually, and it is a huge document and an extraordinary amount of work to demonstrate what the data says, how you're organized, how you've been planning, how you've been developing, what elements of your strategic plan have been accomplished, how have you met some of the federal goals, and all that work, because that local competition then feeds up to a national competition, the COC program grant, of which you get scored compared to all those other COCs that we talked about earlier, those 400 something COCs competing to try and earn more COC program dollars. The lead agency monitors and evaluates continuing care and emergency solutions grant projects, and the process of monitoring and evaluating and scoring is as approved by the board. And so there are standards of how they monitor and they evaluate. We agree what we think performance indicators should be met. We show how that it'll be measured, when it'll be measured, and we track it, and we evaluate the quality of these programs in order to make decisions. Do we continue to fund? When a new project comes out and there are several proposals, when we decide which agency we wish to fund, we look at past evaluation progress in other programs. So we're accountable, and we have an agency to provide the monitoring and evaluation to be accountable. And the point in time count, they conduct and organize the annual point in time count of people experiencing homelessness. So those are just like the 2 or 3 top. Now we look at all the elements and components of what we call the homeless response system. Or some individuals will say the emergency response system or the crisis response system. We're using the homeless response system. There's a lot of different types of crises in a community and amongst the humankind, but we are very focused and targeted. Remember our missions and our vision for people who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness. So let's start from the top. that COC leadership, the board of directors, the COC. And then in orange, these are key operational elements, the infrastructure of the community Raleigh Wake Partnership to be the lead and to provide the HMIS. And then each of these columns represent very specific functions. The coordinated access system, coordinated entry system, helps coordinate and guide the process to access homeless prevention dollars, which homeless prevention, and then there's diversion. And just a key difference, preventing homelessness, its primary goal is to keep you in the housing you have right now. So if you're late on your rent, utilities are down, or there's a conflict with the landlord, can we resolve it and keep you where you are? That is the quickest way to make sure you don't end up in homelessness and we don't have to find new housing. So we try homeless prevention. When someone has lost their primary place to stay, when they've lost their home, then we move to diversion. So they've lost their home. Can we identify another safe and appropriate place to stay other than entering the homeless response system? Can we divert them? What are our diversion tools? Can we quickly move them to another place? Can we problem solve to find another family member? Can we problem solve to find another safe place to stay that would avoid entry? They're at risk of homelessness. How can we keep them from becoming literally homeless? The coordinated entry system, the coordinated access system also helps with referral to housing without supports. They can provide some solutions, housing navigation, and this may be within the coordinated access team. It can also be navigators within the emergency shelter, because most people who are experiencing homelessness will be homeless for a very short period of time. They're going to figure out how to quickly self-resolve or resolve their homelessness rapidly with a resolution that has been assisted and guided with different team members within the homeless response system. And then the coordinated access system is critical for making sure that as people move through the system, those with the highest needs get access to those more expensive and more higher interventions within the system, the housing subsidies, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing. And they do the work to make sure the system flow, the documentation, the organization of coordinated entry functions. The next column is permanent solutions. So we think about connecting people to permanent housing solutions. In other words, not transitional housing or shelter. Street outreach is not just about providing basic needs to people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. They also can be direct connections to care. They can be direct connections to coordinated entry and making sure people are moving through the system. Emergency shelters provide that kind of housing navigation, making sure they're following through within coordinated entry, making sure that they have access to housing resources, information to housing resources. Day shelters and drop-in centers can be involved. These are connecting people experiencing literal homelessness, but their purpose is housing focused, connecting to them to permanent solutions so they can exit homelessness. Housing with supports. Now we're moving into the very specialized type of housing that provides a rental assistance and rental assistance with supports. And when we say supports, we mean case management, someone that is working with them, connecting them to other services, making sure they get connected to community resources, rapid rehousing, intensive case management, assertive community treatment. These are recovery-oriented programs for people who may have co-occurring disorders or within substance use and addiction programs. Permanent supportive housing, but for the ability to provide a long-term rental assistance subsidy as well as supports. And then housing without supports. And some do some about HCV or Section 8 public housing, just rental assistance subsidies only, like TBRA, attendant-based rental assistance, or just finding affordable housing. And then we think about ancillary supports. How do we support people within finding their permanent solution in housing? Furniture, household kits, connecting them and making sure the connections to health services, behavioral health, medical health, doctors. Income supports, making sure that if they need Social Security, different disability benefits, retirement, income, employment, food, even when people are housed, when they're homeless and outside of homelessness, understanding that these are essential services. So the components of the continued care homeless response system is broad and deep. And even though this is like an org chart and you see these rows, what is important to understand is that what has happened in the change in systems of care, these are not silos. They actually work within each other. They work together and they are coordinated, supported by the partnership, supported by COC leadership. And there are rules and there are guidelines. And this is a list of key documents that govern this system of care. The Raleigh-Wake COC Governance Charter, it's established its person, its mission, and exactly how the leadership and the board of directors decided, how different decisions are made, key elements of the membership and what its work and who's responsible for what. The written standards of care, when you have federal dollars that you're making available, there has to be very specific and public and transparent guidance on how people access that care. What are the steps? What are the procedures? What is the eligibility? What are the requirements? And those are laid out. The Homeless Management Information System, HMIS Guidelines and Data Quality Manual, you can see so much of this work relies on data entry, as does almost every aspect of our lives now, that we better have guidelines and trainings and how we manage the data and how it's checked to make sure that the data we produce is quality data, that we can trust the information. And also it completely supports the way each of those columns within that org chart communicate with each other with shared information. And then the Coordinated Entry Policies and Procedures Manual, a wealth of information of how the system steps work. All of these documents, very critical documents for the continued care and for people who work at any sector within the system of care are available on the partnership website there. So now let's talk about, we talked about the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and then the Hearth Act 10-year plans, all this data going up to HUD and all these organizations working in this space, that there are some emerging and prevailing best practices. So I'm going to generally go over those practices and then we're going to move in and show how Raleigh-Wake County have adopted these practices and have put them into operation. So we talked about that crisis response. Key word here, system, working together. What the systems are doing now is low barrier housing first. Remember the chronic homeless, the individuals that seem to be living on the street and nobody provided them care. The concept was that in order to serve people who had the presentation of the highest needs, we had to reduce our barriers. You can't ask someone who is living on the street before they can enter your shelter for, I want to see a current state issued ID. I want to smell no beer on your breath. I want to make sure you cannot smoke here. You cannot do this. And all the rules build up. Well, now that means even the most emergency care, there were barriers. So the concept is that the system, the crisis response needs to address the crisis. Therefore, the barriers to services need to be dropped or at the lowest possible to allow people to come in. That in its housing first. We don't have preconditions to be served by street outreach, preconditions to be assessed, preconditions to get shelter, preconditions for housing. So this is like the baseline fundamental concept of the system. The entire system is housing focused. How, not going into all the different problems and disabling conditions and vulnerabilities of the individual, though that is important in context to understand services needed, but it's always about what's your housing plan? What is your housing strategy? Even street outreach. That the system promotes flow through the system. Very clear pathways, very clear rules, very clear forms, very clear data collected, next steps, stages, reasonable, transparent decision making. So people at the very front of the system have an understanding of how the process can work, that there are multiple pathways out of homelessness, and we're here to facilitate and guide you through it. Another component of the new crisis response system is that we start diverting homelessness. Used to be if you would call a number, there was only one number, or you would get out every emergency shelter phone number and you'd call them and say, there's no room here, no room here. And that was it. That was as much help as you could get. Now we understand it. Engage the individual, have a conversation to see if there's the possibility to prevent their homelessness, retain their home, or divert them from entering the homeless system whenever possible. Now these systems, we prioritize our most expensive, intensive, long-term interventions for those with the longest histories of homelessness and the most severe needs. And we measure that through disabling conditions, acuity, vulnerability, length of stays in homelessness. We identify those with the most severe needs. Understanding that waiting for people to come ask for services means we in the past were serving the people who got it, probably had the most capacity. They always showed up for their meetings. They were never, they were the nice clients. They were the easiest to serve. That's not what we do now. We make sure we serve the people with the most intensive needs, and we do so in a prioritized fashion. Another component of our crisis response system is that we know who is homelessness. We now have this centralized data system, the HMIS. We know who they are, we maintain data, we have data quality standards, we keep up with the record keeping so that everything works efficiently, effectively, and we are accountable. We make sure that we share our data and information so people don't have to retell their story. So these are the elements of how the crisis response system has changed in the last 15 years. This is just a demonstration to kind of represent that flow. On the left, you have people experiencing homelessness. They're seeking help. Families, individuals, people released from the criminal justice system, people from released from a medical or mental health facility, people who are experiencing homelessness on the street. And we have the access points, these centralized areas that people who understand exactly the entire system of care, including street outreach. And we do that initial triage because we want to serve the people with the highest needs, and we want to make sure they get the right care they need. Some people are worried about losing their home and they just need information. And when they come in, we make sure that we don't ask them to come to shelter. We don't make them come to a physical building. We do this over the phone or email, and we say, oh, this is where you need to go. You don't need to come into the homeless management system. Some communities do this through 211, some information and referral systems. And then there's those individuals at risk of homelessness. We've got a notice to vacate. The sheriff's coming tomorrow to put our stuff on the curb. Well, now we want to immediately ask them to provide them with homeless prevention and diversion resources. Start problem solving, because we still don't want you to enter the homeless response system. And we're going to do everything we can to connect you to housing and support resources, community services, to make sure you don't fall into homelessness. But if those don't work, you may enter into the system of care, into a shelter referral. Individuals that are literally homeless, either because of prevention diversion wasn't able to resolve the issue, or because they entered the system as literally homeless. And then we use different tools, triage, uniform systems to assess the crisis, triage using different assessment tools, VI, SPDAT, and SPDAT, to understand more deeply the presence of issues or disabling conditions, so that we can begin to formulate housing plans, housing strategies, or preparing them for access to our more expensive interventions, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing. We have a process to flow through the system of care that is organized, that is a background in coordinated access, a background of HMIS, a background of accountability and cooperation and coordination. So another concept, if you can imagine, about the new 10-year plans to end homelessness, strategic plans, is that we had the audacity to suggest that we could end homelessness. And one of the words that you may hear is the concept of functional zero. Effectively, it meant ending homelessness. And what it refers to is that it's like a milestone within your community response system, as coming up with a way to measure your progress in ending homelessness, and that it's sustainable. And so reaching and sustaining functional zero is a service of building a future where homelessness is rare overall and brief when it occurs. So what are we meaning? And so an example is figuring out, when are you at functional zero? People will always fall into homelessness. We know that. We prevent, we divert, people experience homelessness. It is a dynamic of modern life. So we're not going to end that experience. But what we are going to do is have a system of care that understands the flow, really understands the number of people who are coming into the system. And we have a system of care that quickly identifies, quickly triages, quickly provides the resources necessary for them to exit homelessness as soon as possible. Here's an example. Let's say on May 1, 15 persons, there are 15 people in the homeless system. These numbers obviously are very small, but just for the purpose of understanding. And then throughout the month, 10 people came into homelessness. All right, so that would be over the course of the month, 25 people. But between May 1 and 31, 25 persons exit homelessness. Now, these numbers are a little perfect on the math, but what it's showing is that of the people experiencing homelessness at a point in time, and all the new homeless come in, how many left the system? When these two numbers are the same, or more people exit than enter, then we're seeing reduction. And that when this is sustained over many, many months, you have this, the reaching functional zero for ending veteran homelessness means that 10 veterans become homeless this month, but we end homelessness for 13 veterans every month. So we're able to stay ahead of the flow, ahead of the curve. And so overall, over a long period of time, you continue to reduce homelessness. Functional zero is a huge goal. Many communities have started with trying to achieve functional zero with veteran homelessness, and communities are really working on it to end chronic homeless. Because if we have a system that is making sure that people with the highest level of needs are chronic homeless are getting those resources. Those resources aren't going to people who have lower acuity, lower lengths of stay, but we're reserving those for the people who need it most. This is a way systemically to be seeing significant reductions. It's a goal of functional zero. And so it's a way of looking at your data to see, it's like the ultimate success that you can stay ahead of the curve. Another thing is a concept of a by name list, and different communities use this in different way. And what it's referring to, and let's look at the outer circle. When we talked about the new components of a system is that we know who's homeless, we know who they are, where they are, and we track. When we look at the outer circle of this target, all people experiencing homeless, we are never going to know everyone. This is the whole universe of everyone that is experiencing homelessness in we could say Raleigh-Wake. And we may not even know their name. We see them, street outreach may be making contact with them, but they won't give their name or haven't been in this particular geographic area. So, or they're in places where we can't see them, they're hidden. So there's all those people. Now the next ring in, we call it the HMIS list. This is persons that we know their name now. Now, if it's street outreach, we may only know their nickname or their street name, or we know the people who enter emergency shelter. We know people who called a number. We understand the people here who have experiencing homelessness. So that's a pretty big number. It's like a point in time count, but for the whole, name the period of time, the whole year. That's the kind of the HMI list. People who have been enrolled and entered and given us permission are in the system. Then we talk about we narrow it down to the coordinated entry list. This is the list of people who they've come into the homeless system. We've got an intake. Maybe we've done triage. These are individuals that are engaged, actively engaged in some capacity in our system of care, trying to exit homeless, trying to access our services, actively in our programs. We are working with them. We're using housing navigation. We're trying to do housing placement. Maybe we're preparing them their eligibility, getting their critical documents, working with them on a housing search. So that's even a narrow group. And then the target group, this would be that by name list, their housing priority list. These people, they're imminently ready for, they're housable, their documents are there, coordinated access has processed them, match and referral, they're waiting for the match referral, they're paper ready for housing. This is our target group for our rapid rehousing, maybe for our transitional housing, maybe for our permanent supportive housing. So you can see the fact that we began to organize our communities of homelessness in such a way helps support a system to be accountable and to be more effective and efficient. Another best practice, housing first, and we've talked about it a couple of times, but it is a fully embraced principle for HUD funding. In fact, communities have to detail specifically that programs that are funded with continuing care program grants and emergency solutions grants follow a housing first approach. And so let's kind of understand what we mean. That homelessness is a housing crisis, not a person crisis. It's a housing crisis. And it can be addressed through the provision of safe and affordable housing. We are housing focused, housing first. We believe and understand that all people experiencing homelessness, doesn't matter their housing history, doesn't matter how long they've been homeless, it doesn't matter presentation, presence of disabling condition. We believe and understand and follow the approach that they absolutely can achieve housing stability and permanent housing. Now, a lot of people have a lot of different needs. There are people who are going to go through the system and in aging that are going to need retirement home, assisted living facilities, specialized institutional care that's suitable for them if it's their choice and if it's their best need. Others, private housing, others, permanent supportive housing, others, just short-term rental assistance. We understand all people experiencing homelessness should have access and can achieve housing stability. That's because everyone is housing ready. Sobriety, compliance, clean criminal history, those are not necessary to succeed in housing. And we know that. Think around you. How many people do we know drink too much? Are they homeless or are they housed? The majority of people who have had a criminal background or have anything within their rental history, most of those people are housed. Almost all those people are housed. Thinking about people who are non-compliant with their mental health regimen, they're housed. The experience of homelessness is in the larger structure rare, and just because those individuals may have a higher proportionality of experiencing the inability of substance use, brain issues, mental health disabling conditions, physical conditions, criminal backgrounds, that doesn't matter. It's not, those compliant things are not necessary to succeed in housing. Everybody is housing ready. We understand that people experience improvements in their quality of life, health, mental health, substance use. When you provide the housing, stabilization is easier and faster. So the quicker we get people into housing, the better it is for them to even think about a recovery plan, to be able to stabilize and more easily access healthcare, better to be able to maintain their medication regimen, that they can maintain employment if they have a permanent place to live. So housing provides the stability and quality of life necessary. And people in a housing first approach, they have the right to self-determination. So we treat them with dignity and respect. We don't blame them for their homelessness. We understand this was an experience, oftentimes as a result of some significant trauma. So we treat them with dignity and respect, and we focus on housing. And when we look at a housing first approach, the exact configuration of the housing and the supportive services depends on the needs and the preferences of the population. So we're still very client driven, but understanding what housing choices that we make, we guide, we coach, we connect them with services, but we understand that they have choice and preferences. Strategically allocating and using resources. This is another prevailing theory that has occurred over the last 10, 12 years, that if you're receiving funds, how you disperse them should be strategic. You should think about the needs of your community. You should look at your gaps analysis. You should see what's going on in your shelters and what's been happening at unsheltered and what's going on within your system of care. And you should allocate accordingly. You want to make sure that you have some strategic goals in mind. We want to end veteran homelessness. We want to end chronic homelessness. All right. How many chronically homeless people do you have? How many beds would it take to achieve functional zero? What would you need the mental health providers provide in that to achieve that goal? What kind of assisted living facility coordination collaboration will we need? What's the number? And make sure that when we allocate our resources, that we put a preference or priority on those groups. That we use prioritization factors to decide who gets resources. And it's clearly established, it's very transparent, and it's community priorities. Communities all across the United States establishing the priorities. And it's usually very much data driven. Absolutely, we want to make sure that youth are housed. But do we fund all of youth so we have 50 beds of youth, but there's never been more than 18 youth homeless at any point in time? Should that number be 20? Should we provide supports and then work on prevention? How do we allocate that? Or is it just the opposite, that we have no youth provided provision programs, and we're running them through an adult system of care, which is dangerous, which makes them potentially victim to trafficking? Thinking about our prioritization factors, and they're established by the community, and we make sure that they're made transparent and defensible. We decided to not fund this or to move money here because of this. And because of the ongoing monitoring and evaluation by the partnership, by examining HMIS data and looking at all those HUD reports, we're able to make better and informed decisions to strategically allocate and use our resources. Prioritization, housing list, dynamic, acknowledging that some resources are finite, right? We know we have to make tough calls because we may have 150 people on our priority by name list that need permits for housing, or that would be the best, most safe and appropriate. And we never have more than 20 beds available in any month. Working through that, understanding that we have to make sure that if we do have a shortfall in housing, that then we support it with other supports to make sure that we work within the community to still work on housing, hoping for permanent housing, but maybe there could be another public alternative. So making sure that we realize not only how we use our resources, that we also understand that we use them strategically based on our community needs, and also that there's a reality check there. If we have a shortfall, then we actually consciously do something about it to make sure that people don't just stay in their length of stay in homelessness, especially those that are highly vulnerable. We also started taking this business of homelessness very, very seriously. It's not just one shelter that's been there for 100 years and it's the lowest paying jobs in the community. No, we have a very professional orientation to our practice, that homeless serving systems actually are equipped and staffed with people with the skill set, the knowledge, and the training necessary to deal with people with co-occurring concerns, who understand substance use issues, who understand trauma. And so we have these elements of our practice that is incorporated in our training, that we have empathy, that we are compassionate, because it's not the person, it's the housing crisis, that strengths-based, that we understand what it means that people are resilient. Most people spend the majority of their life housed. We know they have the capacity to be housed. We believe all people are housing ready. So we look for strengths in every way, in every encounter with the people that we serve. We respect them. We make sure that regardless of how different they are from me, we respect them where they are. We understand that we don't know, we have not walked in their shoes. We don't understand what could have transpired in their life, and we respect them, that they are going to be partners in developing housing planning. Boundaries, right? And this can be difficult, especially if you're for street outreach workers, you know, when they're off the clock and they're in the community and the area that they cover is also kind of part of their daily life and their weekend life, and they may encounter those individuals, and understanding what are the rules, what do we have, and we actually will have protocols, and we understand that taking work home with you, taking the worries home with you, understanding that we have to develop self-care standards. We need to understand our boundaries. Managers, program managers, CEOs have to understand that they have to assist in helping their staff establish boundaries within their systems of care to make sure that their workers are healthy and that they are not overburdened and they have unreasonable caseloads. So establishing boundaries as an employer, as a frontline staff worker, and then just as a private citizen. We help, we refer, but we don't have to always take on that. We have an entire homeless response system. So when we're off the clock, you know the number and you know the email to the Coordinated Access Hub, helping to establish boundaries. We have very specific standards of care. What does it mean to provide street outreach? What does it mean to provide case management in a shelter system? What are the protocols and the standards of care for people who call the Coordinated Access line? The standards of care are very clear and transparent. We have rules, we have guidelines. There is literally documents that we follow. We are professional. We don't make decisions randomly. Person-centered. Individuals are experts of their lives. In vivo, meeting people where they are. This is a concept very much for housing-based case management, where people are in permanent supportive housing. We have to meet them where they are. We have to understand where they are in their rehousing journey. Street outreach, we have to understand where they are. They don't want to go to shelter. All right, we're going to continue to serve you. We understand why you don't want to go to shelter, but we're still going to be housing focused, or we have a very structured standard of care. Progressively engaging. We know when to move forward. We know when to hold back. We engage people based on their need. Being able to be self-sufficient, to self-resolve. Sometimes we're not totally in the business of mentoring and coaching. We're just providing information and pointing the way to where the data, where the information, where the website is. And then when we see people struggling, then we progressively engage. It's not working in a housing-based case management, seeing them once a month. These people are struggling, so we're going to change our schedule, and I'm going to start seeing this person every Tuesday. I'm going to engage them. I'm going to increase my engagement with individuals to help them if they're working through a challenge. Trauma-informed. We have taken the training. We understand its impact on decision making, but we are recovery oriented and we are empathetic and compassionate, and we work from that lens. Harm reducing. We understand that people, especially in a recovery orientation or in sort of engagement, we understand that people will act or use things that impact their life. We work with them to make decisions on their actions and their use, and we believe in harm reduction where we can, reducing use of a substance because we know they have a goal to purchase something. And so we literally say we want to reduce the harm to self. Can we go to a different approach to alcohol rather than the binge cycle that is completely disruptive? Guiding, coaching, walking them through what that means, giving them the pros and cons, letting them make decisions, doing harm reducing, suggesting, not guiding, not mandating, not threatening, but helping individuals to reduce the actions or activities that may be causing harm, all with the goal of making sure they can achieve or stabilize housing. That is the context of our harm reducing activities. Recovery based. We do understand that recovery is possible. Recovery happens, especially in a housing setting, and we support, we connect, we coach, we don't mandate. And we have the training necessary to understand how to work people through a recovery-based orientation to housing-based case management. And we know that we're going to be working with people with cognitive impairments. So we modify how we communicate. We may modify how we show information. We may modify how we meet individuals. We may be more empathetic and understand when people miss appointments or are unable to achieve goals that together you've set out. So we understand those limitations and we amend how our professional service is oriented in order to make it possible for them to move through the system or to sustain their housing. Social, racial, and gender equity. We know as fact, and you can find it everywhere on the internet, that people of color, most significantly Black people and Indigenous people, are overwhelmingly overrepresented in experiencing homelessness. We know that people who identify LGBTQ plus, especially youth, are overrepresented in experiencing housing instability and homelessness. We know this. When I say it is fact, you can look at the data. I have participated in the original SPARC study that you can take a look at, that what it means by overrepresented. Let's say I live in a city, 20% of the overall population is Black. When we look at overall how many people are experiencing poverty, you may see that 40% of the people experiencing poverty are Black, even though they only represent 20% of the population. And then when you look at homeless data, point in time data, you see that somewhere around 65% of the people experiencing homelessness are Black, far exceeding poverty, far exceeding the overall representation in the community. This is a fact. And so we know that what fed into the system is a long history of institutionalization, of systemic racism, of never having equal access to home ownership, equal access to housing, equal access to meaningful employment, equal access to education, redlining rules. I mean, the history that led to where we are is documented and being realized. And so our role in examining is to not judge, not bias, not judgment, to know that, you know what, we can't just acknowledge it, but how to move forward. And this has been very much a topic over the last 2 years. A lot of tools out there provided by HUD and United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, Healthcare for the Homeless National Council, on how to work. Maintaining a systemic understanding of the historical and current presence and impact of discrimination, bias, and racism on homelessness. We get it, we understand it, we see it, we have the data. So that we have to actively recognize and take action to counter the inequity that this history and experiences has played in the denial, inaccessibility, or structural limits placed on people to access employment, housing, healthcare, and other essential needs to have an equitable opportunity to thrive, succeed, and carry out a fulfilling quality of life. All right, so that's like our mission statement, and knowing that we want to be, we believe in social justice, racial justice, and gender equity. We believe in it, so we recognize it, and now we have to actively recognize it and take action. Recognizing and changing our own inherent bias in our interactions with people, age, race, gender, ability, ethnicities, religion. Continuing to look for opportunities for training, cultural competency, examining our workforce. Look at our clients, look at our participants, look at our guests and our residents, look at the staffing, look at the leadership, look how decisions are made, who are in decision-making positions. These are ways that we begin to step back and examine and develop action steps in order to counter that. Looking at data, looking at information, looking at race, gender, and ethnicity on the by name list, examining it, tracking it, and then developing as a community strategies. Probably most commonly, these strategies are going to relate to landlord engagement, because oftentimes they can present a bias and a judgment that you can't control, but you could take action in advocacy. A lot of times with employment, again, an employer you cannot control, but you can engage and you can work with Workforce Commission and figuring out ways to find meaningful employment, skill building. It takes tremendous action activity that begins with understanding the history, recognizing and figuring out how to take action, and every day that you go into work, checking your own inherent bias that may present in our work. So now, looking at those best practices and those trends, let's dive in and look at the ways that your community is responding, has responded, and adopted. So we're going to start with coordinated access system, because this is major infrastructure for how your homeless response system works. So before all these programs were funded, there are different monies, and like, well, they do this, they do transitional housing, they do permanent housing, they do intensive case management. And how everybody got there may have been whoever presented actually directly to those providers. The shelter giving people a list of programs, or maybe those programs might visit a shelter one day and take applications, and somehow the one that had the application that was the most ready actually got the offer, the housing offer, and the opportunity. And everyone might have had their own waiting lists, 20, 30 different waiting lists for every different program, a lot of different methods of ways. Some of them had applications, some had behavioral agreements. It was very, very almost chaotic. And now we move to a homeless response system where now as providers, we organize, we coordinate, we understand what I do well, what you do well. We understand that we want to make sure that we're serving the population we're meant to serve. And we also want to expand who we serve, because if we're here to serve the homeless, we can't say we only serve people with co-occurring disorders that are over 60, that do this, that do that, can prove that they have disability income. That doesn't represent the people who need services. They've had to expand. And so now we have this homeless response system that understands to achieve system effectiveness and have the greatest impact on the people who need services most, that we provide the resources that low acuity people need, that we have that teamed up, that people mid acuity, the ones that we don't want them to become chronically homeless, that we have the tools necessary, and we coordinate, we share data, we collaborate, we get together, we actually meet, we conference, and we make sure that we are moving people through the system and they're getting the resources that they need. So when we look at this more functioning system, Housewake, this access hub, that you can call, centralized so that people are not expected to get a list of every homeless service provider and start at the top and just start calling, that we have the professionals necessary and they have direct contact to the service providers. The service providers are going to receive referrals based on what we know they do, how they provide services, so it's better coordinated. We have the HMIS system that's continually working through coordinated access, maintaining data, and also has a service provider data. We know the inventories, we know housing that is available, we know the populations being served, we know the entries and the exits. The by name list, this is our prioritization list, people who have not quickly exited, individuals that are presenting with high acuity, gathering their documents and information, knowing specific information about each individual, and prioritizing them and making sure that those really expensive and intensive interventions are being referred from this list of people who are prioritized in our community. Housing navigation unit, understanding that everybody is seeking housing who is entered into homelessness, and understanding and having the capacity to navigate people, placement, referral, working through the documents necessary, understanding landlord engagement, understanding leasing, able to find help with landlords, able to do move-in, able to do different things, that we have the capacity and the knowledge that is necessary through the housing navigation. So when we start with that first central point, HUD asked every community to establish a number that the 211 would know, that other providers outside the homeless response system to know, that it would be marketed, that people would know you could call this number. And Housewake, you have that number, this 919-443-0096. Or email as well, because some people, some people just feel more comfortable doing email. And it was established. This really has become the front door of the homeless response system. And through COVID, the ability to go to the other geographic location because of social distancing was minimized, and so this has kind of really established that new first step to connecting families and individuals who are in a housing crisis, and figuring out what their initial needs are and guiding them to the next appropriate level. And the specialists are on the call. They know, they're up to date. They know the system. They know the service providers. They know the capacity. They know the resources available, and they're able to have problem-solving discussions with individuals to make sure that this is the one call they need to make. that the specialist on the call understands the different dynamics that are going on, and isn't normally going to provide an individual who's literally homeless with a bunch of phone numbers to care. This is that first access point. The type of people who may call the hub: people seeking services, primarily trying to serve Wake County residents, but also, there's a homeless individual, or I'm advocating for someone, and this is my first call for assistance and help. People who are sleeping outside or unsheltered, they have absolute access to the hub. Individuals and families facing imminent homelessness, right? I got the notice to vacate. The hub allows that initial point to come in, whether you are literally homeless, imminent risk of homelessness, or maybe you just need homeless housing information. I'm scared I'm gonna be evicted, or I think my parents are gonna kick me out. They call the number and get the information they need in order to make that best decision. So these are your subject matter experts of the homeless response system able to respond. Now, there are other access points too, and the regional centers that are available, the youth services, the VA, and they can be referred from the hub, or they may be able to go directly. And again, COVID's picking up again, so that access hub, that first line of defense, a first line of information and referral begins with that central access point. The phone number again. The experience that will happen is there will be some pre-screening assessment, right? Are you just needing information? Are you imminently going to be homeless, or are you homeless right now? And so there will be diversion efforts, homeless prevention efforts available, some basic information to understand if you would be eligible for some of the resources that are available. And then the specialist will actually make referrals based on the information provided. Most of these referrals will happen, especially to the direct service providers, through the HMIS referral system to make sure that it is seamless, effective, and efficient. And it actually maintains the referral system and maintaining the queue or the wait list or the by name list for the different services. Now, getting to that end point, remember the flow, getting to the rapid rehousing and the services. A little information about how Raleigh Wake has responded in the creation of the by name list. And literally, it is an Excel spreadsheet, multifaceted, and it orders individuals by many factors to see who should be prioritized for those more intense intervention, the short-term and long-term rental assistance resources. You cannot access those resources without going through the coordinated access system. So the by name list has literally the scores that have been acquired through the assessment tools, whether or not someone's chronic, the length of time homeless, multiple factors on this list, and it's continually updated. And it is a tool used that when there is a vacancy in these programs, when there is an opportunity, we make sure, using transparent, critical data and facts about individuals, who should be considered to match and referral. The factors for the prioritization in your community, whether or not they're chronic homeless, remember, long time homeless, disabling condition, literally homeless. The other prioritization factors very consistent with making sure that people with the highest acuity and vulnerability are those that we direct to those highest interventions. We look for the presence and documentation of disabling conditions, physical health conditions, mental health conditions, substance use disorders, chronic illness, the length of time people are homeless. So the assessment tool score, the higher the score on these tools means the higher the vulnerability based on many different factors. These are taken into consideration. That way, when decisions are made on housing, they are transparent and they are defensible and they are based on fact. These make up the housing prioritization criteria maintained on the by name list. Now, looking at some other major system components that are within your community, we talked about prevention and diversion. Oftentimes, they are first just problem-solving discussions, but they also that are conducted through triage and discussion, case management services. They may also include one-time small financial assistance, first month's rent or paying arrears to maintain your current housing, or to figure out how to move to another housing option that is a safe alternative. We're trying to prevent an episode of homelessness through our prevention and diversion resources. Street outreach. Street outreach is very structured, a strategic intervention that meets people where they're at, when they are literally homeless, circumstantially homeless, people in cars, people long-term homeless, in encampments. It is respectfully persistent in helping people achieve housing. It has a housing focus, just like the coordinated access system, just like emergency shelter, just like transitional housing. They are focused on helping people exit homelessness, assessing them, understanding their needs, understanding their housing barriers, their supportive service needs, and their vulnerabilities. And they take care of also the basic needs. People are extremely vulnerable who are unsheltered. We still need to make sure that they're eating, they have hygiene, they have food and water, they have access to facilities. They make sure that they facilitate that, build the trust, begin the engagement, and work on a housing solution. And they may get them directly through coordinated access to a housing resource, or they may be able to engage and get them access to emergency shelter. Emergency shelter. This is safe, temporary overnight accommodation for people who are experiencing homelessness, and they are supported in helping find a solution to their housing crisis. Again, emergency shelter, it is changed. It's not come in at 6 and leave at 6 a.m. These the services provided or access to service provided are still housing focused. What is your housing plan? What can I do for you to end your homelessness today? Getting people on the housing plan, getting their documents together, or working with other agencies, helping to make sure that this is getting done. Documenting everything in the homeless management information system. One of the things that I have not mentioned is that remember the different types of homelessness and the 365 days and the time people are homeless. That is critical. Emergency shelters become one of the most critical elements, in addition to street outreach, to recording services and night stays in HMIS, because that is the document. That is the record keeping necessary to verify homeless, potentially directly linked to the possibility of eligibility for services. Very important. Emergency shelters are critical for finding the basic needs and creating the path to housing. Transitional housing, again, it is another safe accommodation, more of a short term, might be a 60-day stay, 90-day stay, 180-day stay. Some programs could be up to 24 months, but the average length of stay in transitional housing is usually more around the 6-month point. Getting the supportive services they need for people experiencing homelessness. The setting may be preferred over emergency shelter, but it is housing focused. It is transitioning people to independent living into permanent housing. Rapid rehousing. The housing intervention, it quickly places families and individuals in permanent housing. It helps with the housing search. It's finding housing within the community. It's looking for private housing where the person who receives rapid rehousing, they're the leaseholder. They can help with negotiating landlords, time-limited rental assistance, ongoing case management, because there still can be a transition. These people may be a bit high acuity, mid acuity, so there have been the presence of vulnerabilities, could be victimization, could be health, could be wellness, could be mental health, could be substance use, but it's not of a chronic nature, or these are people who, but for getting rental housing, they're going to become homeless because their homelessness is been too long, or it's approaching a year. So rapid rehousing provides a critical, quick, rapid connection to housing for those individuals who are not in need of that permanent supportive housing and permanent care. And it also is involved linking them back in community, back into the social network, back into stable housing, especially for families with children, making sure that the children are from emergency shelter back into the community where they're in school, making sure that individuals are provided an affordable housing, and then continuing to give their tools, reevaluating every 30, 60 days, how long the subsidy needs to last, what type of connections and support service, because it can be a very precarious time. And then once that stabilization, household income is stabilized, then we can, they exit from rapid rehousing on to their own independent housing. Permanent supportive housing, one of the more expensive housing intervention. It provides the most vulnerable households who have disabling conditions, but for permanent supportive housing, they present with such high barriers for the ability to just go out and find private housing. It is not there. The income is not there. The need for stabilizing supports is there. And it will be a very long-term rental subsidy and be continually working to attach them to the supportive services that they need. The goal is to assist people with living as independently as possible in housing. Sometimes for permanent supportive housing programs where the clientele is older, sometimes they may transition from permanent supportive housing to a housing choice voucher, to a Section 8 program. They may transition to an assisted living facility. And oftentimes with the value, the quality of life, the recovery orientation of case management, that after 2 or 3 years, they have achieved stability and have a stabilized small household income, and that there are times when they exit back to family, exit to their own private affordable housing, maybe exit into another housing situation with a roommate or family reunification. So people, we say permanent supportive housing. That is because the individual is in need of a very long-term support. They may be there for years and years and years. They may only be there for 28 months, for 36 months, but we now have achieved the stabilizing. There's no threat of end date to the subsidy, and the case management continually works with them. Planning, goal setting, recovery orientation, progressively engaging when things are going wrong, kind of leaning back when there is self-sufficiency presented, and annually evaluating their progress for the program, and probably 30, 60, 90-day intervals, continually evaluating and looking at the progress of the individual through effective housing-based case management. So we talk about HMIS throughout because it is infrastructure. Coordinated access is infrastructure. HMIS is infrastructure. The HMIS is a local information technology system used to collect client-level data and data on the provision of housing and services to homeless individuals and families and persons at risk of homelessness. So everybody's in. Frontline staff use it, case manager use it, providers use, they use the same database to record the client intake data, assessments, case management engagements, annual assessments if they are in service, rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing more than a year, exit information, as much information as possible to avoid duplicating, asking the same questions more than once, looking at progress over time. The HMIS system, if there's ever one thing you could tell is, from the beginning, when you are entering a client, always look at aliases and misspellings to make sure that the client isn't already in the system. Number one, we don't want to duplicate information. We may be updating and clarifying and correcting information, or maybe we have identified someone who is recidivism back into homelessness, and that record is important to understand the history of the client. The HMIS system is how we are accountable. The HMIS system is how we report to HUD. The HMIS is how we report to our Continuum Care Board of Directors and to our local government. The HMIS is a critical tool, and it's our way of not just the system and HUD to understand what we're doing, but also at the agency level. How many people are coming to our agency? How long have homelessness been for the people in our agency? A critical infrastructure system. So there's kind of big components of HMIS. The concept of consent. Yes, we collect data, but we don't do so until after we have that documented participant consent, right? We protect information, personal protective information. That security and privacy are part of the rules. It's part of law. You are legally required to maintain very high standards. We say HIPAA level of standards, when we think of how medical information is protected. And we actually, not just in getting consent and putting in the system, we make sure we protect our passwords. We make sure we shut our computer off at the end of the day. If we're doing paper records, we make sure that they are in a locked location. So we take security and privacy very seriously. Data sharing, yes, we share data, but only when we have an agreement to do so. We make sure that the person that we're collecting data understands that, part of our transparency. Data needs to be entered in a timely manner. Remember that verification of homelessness? You don't wait 30 days to document someone's stay in a program or entry into a program. Those 30 days may be critical and important, or you may forget over time. So you need to do things immediately. Looking at your clients and your caseload, making sure that there's no duplication. Every engagement, especially street outreach, because that engagement, if you saw someone, may be critical to knowing that that person was homeless during that month, working towards that eligibility verification of homelessness for chronic homelessness, making sure that our data has integrity. Performance measurement. Funding relies on performance measured in HMIS. HUD asks all kinds of reports and APRs and all the different documentation. And for most programs, if it's not in HMIS, it didn't happen. You can say, oh, 85% of our people exited to permanent housing, but if we pull a report and we look at see how many people exited from homelessness and we see 5, that doesn't match. If it didn't happen in HMIS, it didn't happen. Another terminology, that personal PII, personal identifying information. There are critical data elements that actually relate to specific information about a client. So when we talk about, well, let's look at some data, but let's de-identify it. Well, we will take out their name, often note, not reveal social security number, not date of birth. We may just have an age column, or we just refer to their HMIS ID. So that way it's anonymous and we're protecting information. Some of the common reports, APR, annual performance report for those COC funded programs, an annual report that will overall look and see at the accomplishments. The APR you can pull these reports at any time. Just because it's annual, you could pull it every 3 months and see how you're progressing in understanding the progress in your program. The CAPA report, the Consolidated Annual Performance Report, that is submitted usually by units of local government to HUD. It manages the funded by emergency solutions grant programs. It also can be very valuable to run a CAPE report, not just about one emergency shelter, maybe all the emergency shelters, to kind of see what the inflows and outflows are looking like at any point in time. Longitudinal systems analysis, more comprehensive data submitted to HUD over the entire system of care. And I would remind you that before data goes to HUD, before data leaves the continuing care, it is de-identified. HUD doesn't see individual data and information. It's aggregated and de-identified. System performance measures. HUD has established these 7 key performance indicators. You can go out on the HUD website and look up system performance reports and see how your continuum is doing. You can see how other continuum of care are doing, kind of to give you a benchmark to see how you are progressing. Stella, this is new, it's being built, and it hasn't been, excuse me, it hasn't been finalized yet. It's going to be building off of longitudinal systems analysis data and system performance data, and it really doesn't stand for anything. It was just developed by a group of women at HUD, and it will be a strategic analytical tool that's going to help the Raleigh-Waite be able to sort of model the pathways through the system of care. So thinking about key metrics, all that data can just make you crazy. But when we think about what is really core to our system or our agency or our shelter or our street outreach program, thinking about key metrics for our homeless response system. And remember that rare, brief, and non-recurring, or rare, brief, and one time, that mission. One is how many people are experiencing homelessness. I mean, just the sheer number. And our objective as a system of care is to reduce the number of people experiencing homelessness. That's why we're doing prevention. That's why we're doing diversion. The other is how many people are moving into housing, right? Because housing ends homelessness. So we know how people are experiencing homelessness. How many, when they interact with our system of care, we want to, how many are actually exiting to a permanent destination? So we want to, as a system, increase exits to housing. How long are people spending homeless? The longer you're homeless, the more opportunity for disabling conditions to be aggravated, frustration, decline in mental health. So we are, as a system, we want to be able to reduce lengths of stay in homelessness. So we measure the length of stay in homelessness. We do that in our prioritization factoring. We also monitor that for the effectiveness of programs, the effectiveness of our coordinated access system, the effectiveness of our shelter. Number 4 is how many people are returning to homeless. We want it to be a non-recurring. We want it to be one time. And so understanding and measuring, it's a system. We want to reduce returns to homelessness. How to reduce returns to homelessness? We make sure that we identify safe alternatives to housing. We're not solving poverty, we're solving homelessness, but we want to make sure people are in a home that they can afford or that is safe. We want to make sure that when people exit our programs, exit rapid rehousing, exit post-support housing, to the best of our coaching and our transitional planning care, that we know they have the tools they need to address problems that may occur so that they are able to take charge of the stability of their housing. Privacy and confidentiality. We have our security and privacy rules, but we want to make sure, and I emphasize this, that data sharing is driven by the client choice. Who, they may have been in homeless a long time, had a bad experience with an agency. We need to understand who we can share with. And then for some clients, it may always be that we share information only in an anonymous factor when we do our case conferencing, and that those consents are documented, and we have the documentation there in client case files or in HMIS. We understand that domestic violence providers, they are prohibited from putting their data in a shared system. They may have a separate server of which they maintain their data, but that doesn't mean they can't have access to our services. So we balance security and privacy, but we have the mechanisms in place so people experiencing domestic violence still have access to our housing resources, and that we are collaborative and cooperative, and we maintain their privacy and confidentiality. We need to be very clear and specific and explain how data is used in our system of care. I'm putting it in the HMIS. This is who's going to get access to it. This is how we use the data. We produce aggregate reports of how people move through the system. This is how our agency manages our caseload. And there's a lot out there, but the actual rules that guide this, the HMI security privacy standards were set in 2004. There have been 2 rounds of interim rules, but it hasn't been final or a proposed rule that have not been converted yet. And maybe in this administration they will. And then the local rules, North Carolina HMS policy procedures, both of these blue underlined, those are links for you to that information. But the HMIS team provides a lot of that technical training and user training, and will also provide the direction to the privacy, security, and confidentiality rules. So how does all the money work? So again, we talk about that COC program grant, the Continuum Care Program, NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability. That comes from HUD, and it's allocated to each of the individual COCs. And how much you get is dependent on prior performance and application and the competition with other communities. And they're competed for. The annual opportunities for new projects may present. We won't know till the NOFA comes out. And sometimes the amount of money that comes into your community increases because fair market rents go up. And so the allocations for rental assistance, this is a lot of words, that budget line item, fair market rents go up from $650 a month to $675 a month. That's maybe $25 a month. So $25 a month times 12 months. And if you have a program that serves 20 beds, that may be increased. You may see an increase in your rental assistance line item. The 2020 allocation, it was an auto renewal year because of COVID and the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. There was too much going on in homeless response systems because of COVID to make you go through that competition. So they did an auto renewal. Yours was $3 million, almost $4 million. Emergency Solutions Grant. Now, this is funding that comes directly to entitlement communities. This would be large cities, counties, the state. and then they decide through applying local priorities how they're going to spend it. They do a request for proposal process, or they monitor, evaluate, and they do a local competition or a process. So in Raleigh, it's a much smaller grant, $275,000 for the city of Raleigh, Wake County, $181,000, very small amounts of money. Uses of emergency solutions grant money can pay for street outreach. It pays primarily, oftentimes, for emergency shelter operations, rapid rehousing, those types of emergency response activities. So all of the different rules for funding are maintained by HUD. The specific office is Special Needs Assistance Program. Some people call it the SNAPS office, and it's within the Office of Community Planning and Development, CPD. And the more and more you get involved in government, the more and more acronyms you're going to see. And so for an example, there is CPD Notice 1701 on coordinated entry guidance. That rule is what created and mandated the establishment of your coordinated entry policy and procedures manual that was first designed and published in 2018. And is continually updated. So when this competition for these resources are there, City of Raleigh, Wake County would control their ESG, Emergency Solutions Grant funding. The local competition, you have a page on the Wake Continuum Care website. And so the resources are there. The other thing I encourage you to do is to join the HUD listserv, go out to the HUD website, and then you can select the programs you're interested in getting notices on. It's just so that you can stay aware of those information. There's also home funds, part of McKinney-Vento, and they can support as far as homelessness is concerned, tenant-based rental assistance program, providing a long-term rental assistance. It's kind of like a match between PSH and transitional housing and how they're usually rendered. Some local governments only provide 24 months of rental assistance and TBRA programs. HOPWA money designated for persons with AIDS. In the HUD Wake County HIV/AIDS grant is $911,000. That's how much money is coming through there. Other federal funding resources, pretty significant in the effort to end veteran homelessness. The Veterans Assistance Support Housing, people call it VASH or the VASH vouchers, oftentimes distributed coordination through the Veteran Affairs Division as well as local housing authorities. In Wake County, you have 328 VASH vouchers in your community. Supportive Service for Veteran Families, that's Prevention and Rapid Rehousing for Veterans, SSVF. And for 22, the Raleigh Wake Passage Home is a recipient at $331,000 for those efforts. Runaway Homeless Youth RHY money, this comes from HHS, different federal funding source, and it provides funding for youth. Currently 2020, $150,000 allocation was given to the street outreach program at Haven House. These are other federal funding resources that are committed to homeless services. So let's look about what this lead agency, Raleigh Wake Partnership, what to end homelessness, how they serve as the lead agency. Now, the Wake Continuum Care House has their vision and mission for the partnership for the lead agency that you will provide safe and affordable housing for every Wake County resident. That's the vision, that every resident of Wake County has access to safe and affordable housing. And we look at the values of the partnership, and these are spelled out in documents and on the website. And these are going to sound really familiar to what we talked about with the continuum care: diversity, equity, and inclusion. That they approach their work using a holistic lens that affirms and respects the dignity and uniqueness of each person. You can hear the examining, meeting people where they are, non-judgmental, unbiased. The value of excellence, that we meet the highest quality of performance by creating and utilizing best and promising practices, and by committing ourselves to ongoing learning. Essential. When we talked about best practice, I said existing and emerging. There's a lot of new ideas out there that we're putting into practice, and then measuring and monitoring the data to say if there is an opportunity to do things well, to do things better, that we strive for that excellence. Good stewardship. We are careful and responsible managers of the resources entrusted to our care. If you're going to fund us, we're going to be accountable. We use the money wisely. We target our resources. Community involvement. Can't do it alone. We recognize the need for community-informed solutions to community-wide issues. We value lived experience, and we engage Wake County residents in our work. You are a part of the fabric of the community of the city of Raleigh and Wake County. And so understanding that the homeless response system cannot only be responsible for the presence and the response to homelessness. Professionalism, we maintain the highest standards of ethics and integrity. That understanding that the homeless response system is a professional system of care. There's much there, but one of the key elements that you might want to tap into, bookmark and follow, and make sure that you're enrolled in the listserv to stay abreast of activities, training opportunities, requests for proposals that are coming up, funding opportunities, meetings, committees on the partnership calendar. These are things that will keep you engaged in the lead agency and the partnership that are going to be relevant to your work. And in addition to just this onboarding essentials, there's a broad array of education and training available to improve your professional practice, motivational interviewing and assertive engagement, very essential in working with people with co-occurring disorders and in recovery orientation. Housing-focused emergency shelter. Those caseworkers that are working in rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, or HCB housing that has supportive care, lengthy understanding what it means to work with someone in their journey, case planning, monitoring progress, all the different strategies that you can use to improve housing stability. HMIS data and reporting, a deeper dive into the data and the reporting and the implications of using that shared data system. Impactful street outreach, understanding how street outreach, when intentional and housing focused, is deeply important within a system of care. Trauma-informed care, almost every component, every entry point to the homeless response system at every one of those intervals, all the way from coordinated access to food distribution, understanding the role of trauma in people experiencing homelessness and what our response is, what is our professional strategies, and how we work within that. Excellent in housing-based case management. Again, looking at the housing-focused emergency shelter. I spoke of excellence in housing-based case management. The housing-focused emergency shelter is that emergency shelter is more than just providing overnight stay, that it understands its role in assessment, progressive engagement, providing and explaining pathways to housing. Coordination and collaboration. This is part of the lead agency, bringing people together. Maintaining accurate data at HMIS is very much a part of coordination in order to facilitate finding clients, measuring progress within the COC, helping clients document their homelessness, uploading documentation, making sure that information doesn't get lost, making sure that we do our due diligence in reporting and being accountable. Sharing information on great landlords and accepting properties. Sometimes when you're a rapid rehousing organization, you get 2 or 3 really good, affordable landlords or property managers in your pocket. You don't want to share because you don't want other people to use those units. You know, you do want to share. That supports our values and our work in coordination and collaboration. Being a mentor to younger new hires. You know, as you get your legs and you've been working and a new hire comes in, and being a mentor to them to walk them through all those acronyms in that process. These are other ways that we can support the value and the work of coordination and collaboration. We don't work in silos. The staff may be in your staff, it may be someone else that you sit next to in a continuum care meeting or in a continuum of care training or task force to make sure that we mentor. And the new hires may not be younger, by the way. I realize that was my bad on saying younger new hires. It could be older, fabulous new hires. Share tips on accessing secondary supports. There's always that one person that has been working in the system for 10, 15, 20 years. They seem to know everybody. I mean, they are like a walking, talking 211 United Way Blue Book system. They know where the people are. They know how the processes work, and making sure that we help everyone and help our clients in order to support each other in our work. Having compassion for participants in other programs and accept the prioritization process, the guide service delivery order. I know you advocate, you go to case conferencing, but the fact is that the client being advocated by another agency is more vulnerable, has been homeless longer, has presenting with 3 disabling conditions. So your caseload is not in competition with other agencies, right? We're making the best decisions, the transparent, defensible decisions, because the client is at the center of our work. So we've got each other's back when it comes to self-care. Sometimes a client dies in a permanent housing program and someone may be struggling, or they think that they should have known or done something about it. We understand that addressing some of the work that we do, the trauma that we see, the cognitive impairment that we see, the excessive substance use that we may see, people harming themselves, people being trafficked. This is hard work, and we want to make sure that we support each other in addressing this and look out for each other. We want to work and listen to and be cognizant of the behavior of other people if we think that they're really taking this internally. Participate in the COC activities, do the count if we're COVID able next January. Get the newsletters, read it, look for something, try to find something to stay informed and keep up to date. And another thing that's really important is to share successes that will lift all of our work. Someone who's been homeless for 5 or 6 years, finally his housing has been housing for 60 days. We de-identify, but we share that celebration. We share the celebration that the first time we actually have available beds in our shelter because we've been moving people out. Looking at how people, wow, we actually diverted 11 people this month from shelter. That's the most we've done in 4 months. Whatever that works, share and celebrate. Leaders, managers, you share and celebrate and acknowledge the work that is done by people that you may be supervising, even the smallest of work. The people who may be in the shelter and working the laundry, and it's always clean and it's always ready and everybody can count on it. It may seem like a low-level paraprofessional job, but you know what, it's critical and it's essential. So recognizing the work that is done at all levels of the process. There's more resources than you can imagine. Different websites you might want to, when you print off this presentation or just make a note of it or add bookmarks of different agencies with different specialization. There's tons of free training. There's all kinds of information. There's guidebooks. There's plans. There's examples of rules and policies and procedures and resources out there and webinars. A lot of information to make sure that you get it right or that you continue to build your knowledge in your practice in the homeless response system. And going back to how we started, we talked about that homelessness isn't a demographic or a characteristic. It really says, and we use the language, the people we serve. And all of us now have the privilege of serving these people. So our orientation is to acknowledge that it is actually a privilege to serve people in need, to be in the helping profession, to be in the helping space. And we know we're not going to get rich doing it, but we've chosen this line of work. And so we believe that though the work is difficult, they are equal to us. We value them and they deserve our best effort. They deserve excellence of service. We understand that our work is a profession, so we're going to be willing. We're not going to give a deep sigh when our supervisor says we have to attend a training or there's 6 hours of training you need to get under your belt and watch these webinars. We're not going to, we're going to, you know what? I may know some stuff, but I may learn something new, one thing new to improve my practice or to help my team. Because we work in a service for others in need, we understand that they are the expert of their own lives. We constantly remind ourselves when we get frustrated when they don't do what we asked them to do or suggested that they do, that we reflect, we think about the language we used, we think about the position they were in. Being homeless, oftentimes you are on a 24-hour survival cycle. So we have to understand and be accepting of the people that we serve, and understand that their reality is not our reality. Their barriers to housing, their barriers to just get a meal, they may have barriers to getting shelter, they may have barriers to accessing their family, that we understand, and we understand and we listen and we guide, and then we follow through. And again, we take care of ourselves because this is hard work. So we continue to do this hard work. We have to take care of ourselves. The mental health day is essential. Hope that you have that dialogue and the capacity to tell your supervisor that you need a mental health day, you know, maybe the why you need that, or that you need support, making sure that supervisors and managers are cognizant of that. And maybe at times, make sure that you do group things, that you have case conferencing together as a team. You do your round robin, you ask everybody where they are, who they're serving this week. Maybe do a mental health check-in, maybe talk about something that's happy in your life, anything that's frustrating, making sure that self-care is often about communication, open communication, making sure that we create the safe places necessary so that we continue to very healthfully and mindfully do this hard work. So now I want to show you a brief video as we close about the hard work. Again, congratulations for accepting the position that you have and working in the homeless response system in Raleigh-Wake. Thank you to the partnership for providing this training. And so now in closing, we're going to watch this video that was created by friends of mine in Texas about the hard work that you are about to take.
This work is hard, really hard.
It can burn you out, make you curse to the point to where you make yourself blush.
Ooh, it'll make you cuss.
Lead you to question why you ever started down this road. Units will get trashed.
Some people you are supporting will die.
Landlords will be angry.
Needles will be found. Overdoses will happen.
Every now and then, you may be surprised to find something weird. Really, really weird.
Poop anywhere but the toilet. Nudity nobody needed to see.
Don't give up, you wonderful helper. You don't give up.
Rent will not always be paid on time and in full. Case management goals will not always be met.
Some days will be spent jumping from crisis to crisis rather than doing proactive work.
Every now and then, you'll find what you think could be the poster child for what success looks like. For today, anyway.
Co-workers will engage in office politics.
Data must be entered.
Case notes have to be done.
A drop-off of donations will happen at the least best possible moment.
Don't give up, you wonderful helper, you. Don't give up.
You have told yourself to practice good self-care. You still have days, well, you don't.
An extra glass of wine here, a little intrusive imagery while trying to sleep there.
Program participants will complain. Community partners will complain. The general public will complain.
Most days you will never serve enough people adequately in a way that keeps others happy.
Or for every happy person, there are several others who are not.
Don't give up, you wonderful helper, you. Don't give up.
You went into this work for a reason. Maybe you forgot why.
Maybe the reason has changed.
Find that reason, hold that space.
Breathe in, breathe out.
You didn't go into this because it was easy.
Maybe you didn't go into it because it was this hard, but you always knew this wouldn't be easy.
Our success will not be measured by how easy we made the work. It will be measured by what we achieved in difficulty.
Don't give up.
Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up, you wonderful helper, you. Don't give up. You have epic things to do.
So everyone, thank you very much for attending the training today, and don't give up, and welcome to your journey working in Raleigh-Wake County in the homeless response system. Thank you.